Camellia. So welcome to our webinar today. And it gives me great pleasure to introduce our speaker, who has recently joined us as part of the Coexistence Consortium. So Camellia is an environmental anthropologist whose work examines the social, cultural, and political dimensions of human and non-human relations through the lens of climate disaster. Her doctoral research, which was done at IIT Gandhinagar in 2024, focused on the Indian Sundarbans, a region that is also her ancestral home. Her work analyzed how people, animals, and forests navigate shifting forms of coexistence amid recurring cyclones and wider environmental precarity. She is currently a postdoctoral researcher at the Department of Geography at Royal Haraway, University of London, where she studies heat stress and its impact on both human and non-human laboring bodies. Her research brings together ethnographic inquiry, creative and participatory methods, and an interest in climate justice and research reflexivity. Camellia has also been a Harvard ASPR Science Fellow and a UHI Earth Scholar, receiving the INLAC Small Grant, INTAC Research Fellowship, and AAS CHSS Grant, and is co-editing the forthcoming volume of Animal Past in the Anthropocene. So a very warm welcome to Camellia, and please take it away.
Thank you so much, Sagarika, for that warm welcome and such elaborate description. What I'm going to do is that I'm just going to switch off my video in order to, if there is any disturbance, and I'm just going to share my screen. And everything works. Yeah, I just wanted to ask if the screen sort of changes or not. I don't know why is this happening?
Right now, we're just seeing the introductory.
Is it changing?
Yeah, it is.
Okay. Okay, so yeah, firstly, again, thank you so much for having me at the consortium. It's really a pleasure to be around people who are actually working on the conservation discourse and multi-species coexistence paradigm for so many years. And I've just an ECR into this. So I'm super excited to be a part of this. So today, what I'm going to talk about comes from my PhD, which, as you mentioned, I completed in June 2024. And now I'm thinking of developing into a monograph. So I call this to be a work in progress. And I'm just going to talk about some of the tropes and some of the ideas that I had discussed in my PhD. And I'm still working around with the idea of multi-species coexistence. And so when I began this research work during my PhD, and my field work basically worked around in 2020, 2021, during COVID period, my idea was to understand the relationship between human, mangrove forest, and the tigers, the three core sort of people in the Sundarbans. And this relation sort of remains central to my thesis. However, as and when I do my field work and till now, I find that it becomes increasingly impossible to treat the forest and the mangrove ecosystem as separate from the humans and the animals and the other species sort of inhabiting it. And this is where I begin and sort of try to transform this just human forest or human animal relationship to into a much more multi-species sort of question. So why the Sundarbans? As Sagarika already mentioned, that this is my ancestral home. My native roots is from two of the Sundarban villages, one that falls in the Bangladesh side of the Sundarbans, and the other one is in the Indian Sundarbans, and have myself experienced the cyclone Ayla in 2009, became a sort of later on became like a formative event for me. And later on, I also sort of growing up with stories about, how my family or people around in Sundarbans sort of was trying to live around this precarious back-to-back disasters starting from the 1970s bucket gun cyclone to Cyclone Isla, and then the recent cyclones like Cyclone Amphan and Cyclone Yas. And these everyday negotiations that the locals were doing with different kind of climate precarities. And Sundarban landscape has, what fascinated me was that despite of all these, recurring disaster that has been taking place since a long time, and in colonial gazetteers, O'Malley sort of describes of 1857 disasters and back to back so many disaster, famine, cyclones, flooding, and still this landscape sort of tries to recover repeatedly. And this is not an anomaly. These are like recurring conditions, and that really fascinated me to study how these disasters are impacting the locals and the more than humans around. Um, Again, Sundarbans is super transboundary in nature. It is divided and it is shared by both India and Bangladesh, and its sort of ecosystem spans national borders, administrative and political boundaries. Uh, and then a very important idea is its socioeconomic and demographic significance. Millions of people living in Sundarbans, and because I work in the Indian Sundarbans, uh, the people who are living are socially disadvantaged communities, basically the scheduled caste, the scheduled tribes, or the Adivasis, and the other backward castes, including the minorities living there. And they are heavily dependent on the mangrove-linked livelihoods through fishing, honey collections, crab collections, NTFPs, and also tourism. And lastly, obviously, the biodiversity assemblage. It is the only mangrove forest which inhabits tigers, but it also has other animals living in it: crocodiles, dolphin, snakes. The 5 venomous snakes that are found in India, 4 of them are also found in Sundarbans. There are wild boar and other sort of complex mangrove um, uh, species that are available in Sundarbans. So this combination makes Sundarbans sort of a compelling site to think about this kind of multi-species assemblages under climate stress. And to ground this work, I sort of work in this two forest fringes areas, which is Samshernagar and Kumirmari. Samshernagar, both of them are forest fringe villages. And Shamshernagar is the last village of West Bengal. And it also sort of borders with um, Bangladesh. And these are fringe because this is where the boundaries feel both present and unstable in these conditions. Um, and these are also the 2 villages which haven't been really talked about in the Sundarbans, plethora of Sundarbans scholarship that has been around for a long time. Um, for my field work, and just to give you an example, this is Samshernagar, and if you see on the other side here, you will find on your right hand side, this is the mangrove forest, and on your left hand side, this is the the Samshernagar village, and both are sort of separated by this small narrow river stream. And during low tide, this stream sort of vanishes, and you sort of can move in and out of the forest. You just have to traverse through this net fences. So this was very interesting to see how close the people are living and how close proximity with the forest. And my fieldwork sort of unfolded in different phases, which I called as patchwork ethnography, because I was moving in and out from between 2022 to 2023. And one of the reasons was the COVID-19 lockdown, and there were a subsequent West Bengal state elections. And after my PhDs, I still return for various visits, and in 2023, 24, and recently in 2025. Um, and what people say about tiger snakes, mangroves, or embankments is it is shifting across time. And we find that the disaster memories that people hold are just not of themselves, but also of different animals that are getting impacted by the disasters. It was great to understand how disasters temporality sort of moves not only within humans, but across the human, non-human, or more than human entities. Um, and and here, what do we mean by coexistence? Obviously, this is the Coexistence Consortium, so I'm not going to go deep into the theoretical nuances around it. But just what I felt is that in conservation paradigm, coexistence is often framed as a peaceful harmony. And what I was trying to understand, and from the aspect of coexistence in Sundarban, that there is a layered negotiations that takes place when we're talking about coexistence. And it is not the question whether humans and wildlife coexist. Obviously, they are coexisting in different conditions, in different spaces across the world. But the question is how, under what condition, and at what cost. Talking about methodologies, I have worked through a mix of approaches because obviously a single method wasn't able to capture the complexities. And because of the limited time I had during COVID-19, I wanted to explore as many methodologies to sort of understand the nuances, what I wanted to find. So there were semi-structured interviews with not just the locals, but also the forest officials and the local NGO workers and other stakeholders. And I wanted to engage more through very in-depth conversations and dialogues with the locals rather than making it an interview. We did a little bit of household surveys, but a lot of participatory activities, doing a lot of mapping, transect walk, GPS, along with GPS locations, group discussions. And later on the stages at the end, during the final years of my PhD, I started interacting with the communities and engaging with a lot of creative sessions of engaging with painting, poetry, prose writing sessions, through a lot of storytelling sessions, but also performances and attending cultural nights, and also becoming one of the performer in the Jatra, which is a folk theater itself in Sundarbans. I'm not going to go talk about the cyclone and post-cyclone floodings at the impact of on humans, and because that will take itself more than half an hour about it. But this is just a glimpse of how it has directly impacted, and these are the pictures from my field. Some of them I have taken, and some have been sent by my interlocutors through WhatsApp when I was not present around. What I found very interesting is that the most interesting thing is I want to foreground is the more than human impact, because they often appear through livelihood dependencies on the mangrove forest and through how animals move and adapt during disasters. And one of the first thing I saw was noticing how people were often talking about the mangrove forest, and I could myself visualize how the mangrove trees were uprooted around, while taking trips around the forested islands. You can see these images of the trees being uprooted. And when asked about the forest conditions, many respondents sort of described the mangrove forest as worsening since the 2000s. And there were difference between villages, and this difference in how people interpret worsening remained consistent. And what was the reason of the worsening is led to understanding the impact of cyclone and post-cyclone flooding on the mangroves. So ecologically, mangroves are like the shield to the Sundarban ecosystem. They are like the protective shield. They hold soil. But what we find here is that cyclone produces fast impacts, storm surges, heavy waves, erosions, and formation of tidal floods. And people say that, because of this continuous disaster that has been taking place back to back, we find a lot more tree uprooting and root destruction, weakening soil binding. And this leads to the breaching of the embankment. And once that happens, saline water sort of intrudes into forest soil and village land, and it does not leave quickly. One would say that mangrove trees are, they are salinity tolerant, but yes, they are saline tolerant, but they're not salt loving. So they would be able to tolerate salt at an optimal level. But once this saline, salinity level increases because of, recurring inundation of the water, saline water, it becomes really difficult for them. And then comes, so this is the cascading impact that I'm talking about. This is this prolonged waterlogging and salinity change, that very conditions that the mangroves need to thrive sort of, breaks them apart. And one of the example is the Sundari tree, from where the name Sundarban comes from, which is the Heritaria forms. It is said to be either almost gone or it's seen dying. People sort of connect this to the increase in salinity and the repeated cyclonic incursions. Um, and a very interesting sort of anecdote that comes around, where one local says that we can confine our boundary walls, for example, the village walls, through sort of, heightening the increasing the height of the embankment. But can it be done all throughout the forest islands? And who is going to do it? Will the forest officials going to take responsibility for making this high-rise embankments all throughout? So it shifts the gaze, and it asks who protects the forest. And it's just not about the mangrove trees which are living inside the forest, but also the different animals. And this was the first sort of visible cues of the more than human impact of disaster, that was the mangrove. But there were also the other cues of impact on animals and their adaptation. So during Cyclone As, I get this picture forwarded by one of my interlocutors, where a deer was washed towards the Samshinagar village. Fisher sort of described rescuing it and taking it for care. And just before the cyclone, this deer was sort of seen grazing on the other side of the forest. And in this moment, it is the deer is not just a wildlife; it becomes a displaced being, like we find in humans itself. Another example, through oral histories, we come to find that during Ayla in 2009, people described that the terrestrial snakes became almost extinct. They all died due to the excessive incursion of the saline water. There was heavy water logging for months. And they described that there was water contamination because these snakes sort of were dead, their bodies was inflated, and they were floating in the water, making the water sort of contaminated. However, the only snake that people remembered surviving and was seen surviving for the next couple of years after 2009 was the Kalnagini, or the green vine snake. And more recently, sort of villagers have sort of noted that cobras are also seen to be climbing trees frequently. And this point of cobras climbing trees frequently, I've not seen it, and I'm not claiming the definitive, behavioral science from this anecdote. What I want to sort of locate here is that local sort of read this ecological disturbances through this kind of animal adaptations. And could that be a part of animal adaptation? And this kind of thing sort of probes me into how animals and humans both are moving across the forest and the village spaces together. If you look into this picture, and if you see, so the locals would eventually sort of remove the net like this, and they would like push their dinghies or the boats inside. And I've accompanied them in a couple of times. And this is how they every day traverse through the nets. So it is just not the humans who are traversing through the nets that has been established and that has been made to sort of create the boundary between forested islands and the village habited islands, but also we see different animals are sort of moving in and around of this. So snakes slithers in and out. Boars would also like sort of dig through these mud spaces and move inside the villages. And in 2021, when I was in Samshinagar, we find there was the incident of tiger trespassing inside the Samshinagar forest. So this kind of sort of movement sort of questions us that there are negotiations of coexistence, but what are the different kind of negotiation that is happening? What are the different forms of impact that is taking place due to disaster? And how are people sort of living when these kind of boundaries become porous? And often what happens during a cyclone disaster, these net fences sometimes tear apart, break, and just makes it easy for the animals or even the humans to move across a bit more easily. So before moving forward, I want to flag that the next slides contain some sensitive images related to the tiger attacks, victims and survivors. And I would request you not to take any screenshot of these photos. I don't want to sensationalize, what is happening. Human tiger conflict, it is vehement, and it is happening across India and in the world. And it can easily be categorized as just mere conflict. But we are thinking in a subjective notions, what happens, why is this conflict happening, and can we think beyond conflict? Um, and tiger, in my thesis, I called them to be this constant negotiating cohabitant, and this negotiation is uneven and most of the time violent. Um, so these are some of the maps that I sort of created with the communities. I had a participatory workshop was conducted in Samshernagar, where I trained a couple of young people how to use QGIS and how to make the QGIS map. So it was made in collaboration with them. And if you can see through this map, we have different spaces and different areas across the forest, the fringe forest and the village. The areas where tiger attack spots were there, tiger sighting spots were there, and cattle lifting spots was there. The similar participatory mapping sort of activity was also done in Kumirmari. And if you see the image at the below, this is the image of a dead body which was recovered in the Morichapi Island. And if you see these two sort of legends, or two of the ideas here, I have sort of tried to encounter human tiger conflicts in Samshernagar from 2000 to present. So the amount of human tiger sort of conflict or sort of interaction that is happening in Samshernagar has been taking place since 2000. Whereas in Kumirmari, it is a very recent phenomena, and talking it from a very contemporary point of view. These kind of increase in human tiger encounters are taking place from 2019, and because of people say that post cyclone Bulbul into 2019, a tiger from the core area has moved to the Morichapi Island and has been turned into a man-eater and has been attacking humans. And one of the example is right there. And in 2021 December, I was there in the village when there was a trespassing of a tiger into the Kumirmari village. It is very fascinating to understand that, unlike Samshernagar, the boundary or the river that sort of divides the Kumirmari here and the forest island is quite big. And it is already been established that tigers can swim. The Bengal tigers in Sundarbans can swim along, and because of the decrease in prey, while talking to the forest officials, that this particular tiger has entered into Kumirmari. The idea here is to sort of engage with the contemporary spots where tiger interaction happened in both the villages. And what I wanted to ideate from this is that what were the people were citing to understand why the human tiger conflict is happening. And most of them have said that obviously humans are an easy prey. The prey is sort of, the prey population is decreasing. And I remember in this today, somebody in the consortium WhatsApp chat has also shared this particular news about, how the prey population is decreasing. And that's why there is a lot more attack by the tigers on the humans. So these are different sort of reason that was sort of cited by locals. And what matters here is that the ecology and politics are inseparable in local explanation. When people say tiger is coming more, they often mean that the forest conditions are shifting, boundaries are shifting, and the government is not, or the local authorities are not responding evenly. And this is where I ask a question that I initially assumed would have a predictable answer, but it did not. So I wanted to think about, can interaction go beyond sort of conflict? So in a survey, we asked that, do you want tiger as a part of your lives in the Sundarbans? And many said yes. I interpret this yes as that this is not just a very a very positive correlation of coexistence. It can mean that the acceptance is happening under constraints, under moral framing through the folklore of Bon Bibi, the recognition that the forest is also the tiger space, or also like simply accepting the reality that tigers are unavoidable because one has to risk their life to go inside the forest for their livelihood. Politically, it matters because it complicates the idea that local people only want removal of the tiger, or if they want separation from the tigers. So we find that there are a lot of negotiations that people are doing with their lives to sort of, cohabit or sort of coexist with the tigers. And one of this negotiation example is through tourism. And tourism becomes a way of reframing the risk of livelihood. So a lot of tourists, in Samshernagar, when in 2021, this particular tiger sort of trespassed into the village, post the news went out, there was a huge amount of footfall in Samshernagar, which was not before quite a tourist spot. And recently from 2021, it started to engage and attract a lot of local tourists into it. Similarly, from Kumirmari, a lot of people would say that if the tiger gains from attacking us, we should also gain from exhibiting it. And tourism becomes a sort of a negotiating sort of strategy here. Why I'm saying so, because again, we have to understand that not everybody can have access to the tourism. It is also not even distributed. Not everybody can become a guide, become a tourist sort of homestay. It needs a lot of financial capital and access to those benefits. In my PhD, we sort of discuss about these different phases of interaction that humans and tigers have gone through, the intolerance that happened during the historical conflict and fear of man-eaters, and then the forced tolerance through conservation efforts. And then we talk about these different exceptions and negotiation that is taking place constantly and very subjective in nature across different villages. For this case, I'm just talking about Samshernagar and Kumirmari. The negotiation could be non-positive or negative in other spaces of Sundarbans. Now, while working through tiger narrative, I realized something very important, that tiger is not the only one that is shaping human lives. It is also shaping other species that are perceived and how those species interact with each other. And this is how two of the species comes to be a comparative sort of analysis in my work, where how snakes and wild boars sort of enter in everyday conversations with the local when we were talking about tigers. And snake sort of remains embedded in everyday lives as a routine cohabitant, unlike the tiger, whose presence is often framed as, occasional intrusion from forest to villages. Often the attacks on the tiger, attacks by the tiger is actually happening inside the forest spaces. But a lot of snake biting that is taking place is happening in the village spaces. What stood out for me is that there is no retaliatory killing of snakes, and which is often emphasized in a lot of conflict literature as a dominant pattern, but I do not see it here. And there is a restraint towards snakes, and this restraint was very something to sort of explore around. And it was sustained through three linking aspects. One was ecological presence and its awareness, the sort of snake bite and it's leading to very customary healing practices through this local quack doctors that people call it as ojhas, and then the cosmological accountability through the serpent goddess Manasa. So while the tiger is said to be the charismatic megafauna, in Sundarbans conservation paradigm, the snake is very central to the everyday cultural term. I'm not going to go in detail with all of these nuances. What I found really interesting and I want to highlight is that snake bite has been a major health concern around Sundarbans, and people move through overlapping treatments. There are people who are into these traditional and ritual and plant-based ojhas, but people would prefer them more over just going to getting anti-venom shots. But another important factor was here is the reverence of the goddess Monosha or Manasa, whose worship sort of intensifies during the monsoon period when snake encounters rises. And killing a snake is often framed as inevitably misfortune and infertility. So what happens is that this killing a snake would also proves that in retaliation, if you kill a snake, you would also anger the goddess Manasa. So it sort of links to the ecological awareness that a lot of local folk theaters have incorporated, and a lot of NGOs have also incorporated around. So snakes occupy a very paradoxical position in the Sundarban landscape, and it is very symbolically powerful within a very socio-cultural nuance, and it is extremely morally protected through the cosmologies of the serpent goddess. Um, and from snakes, we find another animal, very interesting itself, which found, and I've interacted with wild boar a lot while I was in the field, and it is often described as the unwanted intruder. Um, Ecologically, boars are the tiger's second most abundant prey after spotted deers in Sundarbans. But socially, people would consider them as unwanted, trespasser, or and so board sort of we see board sort of trespassing. If you see this small video, boards have trespassed through the nylon net fencing, and people describe this to be increasing right after cyclones and saline flooding, because salinity and flooding sort of degrades forest food availability, and board then would raid village crops. They would dig these trenches and destroy salt affected farmlands of the locals. And this is where sort of cyclone disaster becomes like an amplifier here. And the board becomes more intruder, not simply because it exists, but because sort of flood and salinity have already weakened the agriculture productivity of the locals. Um, and the another aspect of is that the wild boar, or the consumption of pigs, become entangled with the social hierarchy itself. Um, boar has a very social symbol in the Sundarbans landscape. Pigs are often associated with low social status, and in oral histories, we find that hunting and consumption of wild boar was pretty common, and a lot of Adivasis would be sacrificing pigs and wild boars to offer it to their folk deities. However, in recent times, people have started to lower their sort of hide or mask their relationship with the pig in order to sanskritize themselves in the Sundarban landscape. And people would say, no, we do not consume wild boar or pigs. Boar becomes subordinate not only within the ecological narratives, but also within social stigma narratives. And also, unlike the tigers and snakes who have their own local mythologies and goddesses, the boar sort of lacks that strong protective mythology. And in this matter, if we sort of rank the species, we find that boar takes the most lowest rank in the species hierarchy. So in a survey, when we asked people to rank what animal they consider most in very socio-cultural and ecological nuances and the salience in their everyday lives, what emerges as that snakes ranks very high in socio-cultural ethos, and tiger after that, and at the end and at the last, it is the wild boars. And what is very interesting is that why snake sort of takes this this position, because the local cosmology of goddess Manasa is much more revered than the cosmologies or the stories of Bon Bibi. One would always have seen Sundarbans just talking about the reverence of Bon Bibi and Dokhin Roy, but there is a huge presence, not just within the forest fringe village, but also the villages which are landlocked and not completely dependent on the mangrove forest. They majorly revere the snake deity over the forest deity. So. It is important because the charismatic megafauna like tigers may not always be the most salient species in everyday moral life. Yet we find that tiger sort of dominates this conservation narrative and often overshadows the less sort of conspicuous species like the snakes. So species saliency is very strategic and shifting in this in this manner. So species importance sort of shifts across when we are talking about conservation paradigm, then it is the tiger, but when we are talking about cosmology, then it is the snakes. Um, at this point, I want to bring in one more species that keep returning during my fieldwork. And I did not sort of go deeply into it in my thesis, but I sort of approach it through sort of livelihood dependency is the bees, and this is something I'm currently working on. So I, um, I feel that the bees could be one of the most climate sensitive cohabitants at this point of view, because while talking with the traditional honey collectors who navigate the forest through uh, through everyday complexities, they sometimes sort of understand that how bees would are important, and the knowledge of the bees and how bees sort of navigate the changes of climate, and specifically the changing of climate scenarios and the weather patterns. Uh, because after Isla and with repeated salinization and cyclone, flowering timing sort of has disrupted in for mangrove trees, and this increased salinity stresses mangrove roots, as I've already talked before, and it also sort of affects flowering. So flowering changes affects pollination. So there is this whole sort of link that I want to explore with the bees. I'm still sort of exploring this, but I thought it would be great to sort of also talk about bees, because they play a major role in understanding the shifting climatic impact on different species in Sundarban landscapes. Uh, so, uh, so before I sort of try to pull all of these species together, what I want to talk about is that in different tropes, in different sort of multi-species interaction and in multi-species coexistence, different forms of tropes of hierarchy sort of exist. And so I've concluded my PhD with 4 propositions, which I'm just going to talk here. First is obviously the hierarchy, and I draw from Youth's work on political multi-species relation, where hierarchy is not about relative position, power dynamics, and interaction among species that is shaping ecological roles, resource access, and political recognition. But we see in the Sundarban that the saliency or the importance sort of shifts strategically. Tigers sometimes dominates this whole conservation paradigm, snakes dominates cosmological narratives, and mangrove sort of becomes a very central protective shielding infrastructures. So different species has its different importance across, across Sundarbans. And the second aspect is the relational impact, where cyclonic crisis sort of makes interdependency much more visible between human and more than human lives. And that's why these humans and more than human lives are not separate threads, but they are sort of entangled, and they're subjective to each other. And then the third is as we said, that coexistence here is not in a stable condition. It is an ongoing negotiation made by everyday adjustment, and it is and we find there is a consistent tension between the traditional ecological and folk knowledges, which often get marginalized with the central and state governance alongside top-down management issues. And and finally, climate change acting as a catalyst, where ecological disturbances sort of intensifies political and ecological hierarchies. So disaster impact cannot be assumed to be identical across villages or across species relation. So it is quite it keeps on changing. It is very subjective in its nature, and we it is very difficult to sort of generalize the outcome. And I just want to point it out that what I've been talking throughout the past 40 minutes, it's just from my experience and the subjective encounters or the interviews that I've done with the locals. It might be different in different forest range villages across Sundarbans. And lastly, currently, I am engaging with much more creative activities of understanding how locals interact with the more than human aspects, and what do they understand the rationalities and relationalities with the more than human aspect. And I want to end I want to end the presentation by playing this small poetry session that I sort of conducted last year through a grant that I've received. And what I'm trying to do is that to engage through these creative practices to find out how local people in their everyday lives sort of interact and engages with different species. And this is a poem relating to a forest space, which is known as Buri Dabri, which is one of the forest areas in the core forest area. So I just wanted to.
অপরূপ সাজে সাজিয়াছ তুমি নীল মেঘমালা আবরি শ্যামল বৃক্ষ আবৃতা জননী তুমি যে বুড়ির ডাবরি সবুজ পাতার আড়ে আড়ে তোমার নদীর ঢেউ মোরা দেখি আপন মনে আর দেখে না কেউ পূর্ব দিকে রায় মঙ্গল ধোয়ায় তব চরণ অপর দিকে ঝিলা মাগো করে তোমায় বরণ বৃক্ষ শাকে পাখিরা বসি করে কলতান প্রকৃতির এই দৃশ্য হেরি জুড়ায় মোদের প্রাণ অরণ্য মোদের প্রাণবায়ু মাগো রক্ষা করিব মোরা সবুজে সবুজে ভরিয়া উঠুক মোদের শ্যামল ধারা বন বিভাগের কর্মী ভাই করিতেছে আহ্বান দিকে দিকে তারা তুলিতেছে ধ্বনি একটি গাছ একটি প্রাণ বন সুরক্ষা কমিটি জাগিছে সবুজায়নের আলোকে সবুজের গান গাও আজি প্রাণ সবুজ বনের পুলকে চিরকালের অমর হইয়া স্থায়ী হোক তব মাধুরী মোদের আশার জরণ্য মাতা তুমি যে বুড়ির ডাবরি নমস্কার সবাই ডাবরি
And yeah, that's it. I just want to thank everybody at IIT Gandhinagar, my PhD supervisors, external examiner who has shaped my thesis, Professor Radhika Govindrajan, and different funding bodies, my field assistants, and the whole presentation is dedicated to the locals with whom I've been working since 2021. Thank you, everybody, for listening to me. It was a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Camellia. That was an absolutely fascinating talk. And I think just a lot of, things to think about from that, and a lot of great takeaways from that as well. And I love the bit where you said that, in some ways there is no separation between the ecological and the political bits as well. So yeah, I think thank you so much for taking us through your work. And I'm going to now open the floor for questions. And like I said, you can either put it on the chat and I can read it out to Camellia, or you can just maybe raise your hand and unmute yourself and ask your questions directly. Go ahead, Rana.
Hi, Camellia. Thank you very much for a wonderful talk. It's very, very, very beautifully done. I'll just start off with a small question, which is the Buri Dabri. Did you do the translation or did Mr. Bishwash do the translation?
It was just an instant translation that I wanted to do it before. I'm still working on the translation. So what I'm doing currently at that, I'm creating a repository with all this. So I've done a lot of poetry sessions and prose sessions and painting sessions with the local communities. I'm trying to build a digital repository with both Bangla and English, and sort of do a small sort of also exhibition in Shamsher with them. Probably, yeah.
Are you also recording songs? Do you have?
Yes.
Have you recorded some songs that?
Yes, I have recorded songs. I've also participated with, so I've also learned a little bit of. So what they've done is that they've also incorporated a lot of ecological awareness through the songs in jatras and folk theaters.
Right.
So I've tried to participate in a couple of those folk theaters and try to learn some of the songs that sort of valorizes or brings in the nuances of snakes, specifically in Monosha Mongol Kampo. But that's
Wonderful.
Specifically what I've engaged with. Yeah.
Yeah. So may I just ask a related question, Sagarika? The jatra that you're talking about, so have they been designed for these messages, or have they traditionally evolved over time, and are they sort of fairly old in terms of their origin?
Thank you, Ananda, for it's very interesting. I think it's fairly old. So the the tradition of Jatra has been taking place across Bengal for a
Yes,
long
of
time,
course.
since
Yes.
17th, 18th century. But in recent sort of forms of Jatra, we find that the stories have sort of adapted and readapted. We find a lot of newer, so people have tried to meld in a lot of ecological awarenesses, where there are scenes where people would be trying to whip or beat the snake goddesses, and then there is, she's getting angry, and then after, once that's, so there's a scene where people would be beating the snake goddesses, and after that there is the whole village is actually destructed, there is cyclones and all. So I think there people have started to bring in these kind of little adaptations to sort of
Nice.
meld into this moral sort of ecological awareness around.
Wonderful. And a final question related to this. How much do you see some of these practices in terms of theater, jatra, poetry, songs? How much do you see it being transmitted across to the younger generations? Do you see an active attempt to spread these, or do you see passive intake where the younger people learn? So I'm just basically wondering, because I know the forces of employment and other economic forces will take away the newer
Yes.
generations away from their villages. So how much do you think these will survive? I mean, I don't
Yeah.
have
No,
an
no.
answer, but if you have some gut feeling about what
Yeah.
you've seen there.
Just to add to that anecdote, that my uncle was a jatra performer before, and
Right.
we never actually learned from him. So
Yeah.
eventually, what happens is that the next generation are so much engaged into different quicker aspect of
Right.
livelihood, that they wouldn't engage. So but there are people who would want to, like, I've seen a lot of younger population who would be participating for
Wonderful.
different performances,
Right.
but they are mainly doing it just for income. I don't know how much it is inculcating
Sure.
awareness
Sure.
around them. This is something would be very interesting to sort of see
Absolutely.
and engage in this conversations. But I've also seen a lot of people would make videos and put it in YouTube's.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah. But again, what is the motive behind it? Probably is
Yes, might be.
completely
It might be really
monitoring and
worth exploring this,
yeah.
actually.
So yeah, thank you
So,
so much.
so if
Probably
you
I would.
don't mind, I will get in touch with you, and I'd like to learn a little more from you.
No, it's lovely hearing from you. Thank you so
Thank you.
much. Huge fan
Thank
of
you.
yours work. Thank you.
No, so am I now. Thank you.
Nothing very profound, but I was intrigued by the use of terms like intruder and trespass,
Yes.
both in the case of animals. I mean, you talked of tigers, wild pigs being intruders and trespassing. I mean, can you explain that to us?
Yes, I mean, for example, trespassing is obviously it's a very fortress conservation sort of terminology that I have used, and I take responsibility of using the term, and I understand it has a lot of bearing to it. Intruder, because I did not find a better word to it, but I also actually sort of translated a Bengali term that people have sort of said about, this wild boar are coming and sort of entering into our houses and, sort of breaking and breaking into our agricultural land and all. So the nearest possible word that I used was intruder. But I've also made sure in my thesis saying that these are very, words that has multiple meanings to it. So I understand what you're saying. So I should have been a bit more mindful around using these terms, but I just used it because I was just trying to replicate or find a sort of nearby possible transliterated sort of word that people have used in Bengali. So these were the most possible words that I could have used.
Sorry, Sagarika, may I do a small follow-up? I mean, it's not so much the word, it's more the meaning and the intent that I'm interested in. I mean, translation, I understand all of that, but are people viewing animals as intruders and trespassers?
Specifically, in place of wild boar, it is, I forgot to mention. So what people would do is that they would put up this low voltage sort of fencing around their farms. And there has been a cases of wild boar electrocutions around. So for them, wild boar is sort of thought to be an intruder and a trespasser, because they have made an attempt to sort of stop wild boars and chasing wild boars and do retaliatory killing of wild boars.
Thanks.
Yeah.
So if I may just add one line to what Ravi was saying, I don't think, Camellia, you need to be apologetic about using these terms because clearly these are not your terms. These are how the people are seeing them. So one possibility is to use them in italics or to put inverted commas and explain the etymology and why they originated. And that I think should be fine. I personally feel that it's fine because it does bring out, in some sense, these terms, even though they may not be expounded upon, they do bring out a sense of how people are looking at these other beings. And I think it's important to retain them. What might also be interesting is, over time, do you see a change with new terminologies coming in? And that itself would be a very a wonderful way of documenting change, not through direct teaching or direct transmission, but by a gradual acceptance of new conceptualizations. Yeah, thanks. Sorry, I interrupted.
No. Thank you so much for this. Yeah, thank you.
I think so. My question, I think, is a bit of an offshoot from what Rana was talking about earlier on. And I think it was absolutely fascinating for me, given the discourse about, man-eating tigers in Sundarbans and, how sensational it is for us as, an audience who's not part of that landscape, that people still wanted tigers in their landscape, and that came about because of this culture and the religious aspect to it, and similar with regard to snakes and the goddess Mansa as well. And I think my question is that given the current maybe change with regard to younger populations migrating out of the Sundarbans, do you feel that in time to come, this this perception of wanting to coexist with animals in the landscape would change because of a break, or is there a break, or do you perceive a break with regard to migrations and people not living in that landscape but moving to other landscapes and then maybe coming back here again?
Thank you, Sagarika. Very important question. And I just
they don't have a price.
Okay. Sorry. I just wanted to point out about this whole idea of migration, and it was very interesting actually while I was doing my PhD during the COVID period, because we find a lot of reverse migration happening during that time, and a lot of people actually who had migrated for jobs had actually come back to Sundarbans, and once the lockdown was lifted, because there was no jobs later on, a lot of people actually stayed back. And migration in Sundarbans actually is very seasonal in practice, or very yearly in practice. They would just go for some years in the southern India to work on different garment factories and all, and then they would work for certain years or certain months or seasons, and then they would come back. So I think I wouldn't. This is something I've also mentioned, and I wouldn't go in depth because I've not actually worked around the idea of migration in Sundarbans. That was not my forte. But I think migration took a different place post-COVID, because again, people have actually started to come back to Sundarbans, and actually post-COVID, the footfall for livelihood dependency inside the forest had actually increased post that. So I think people have started to acknowledge a bit more about their own landscape around. So it would be interesting to come back to this point probably another 5 years later on, when people have again started to move out of the Sundarbans. But I think as for the locals, I think because for me, I'll take my examples. I'm born in a village in Sundarbans, but I was never brought up. I was brought up in urban settings. I was always grown up with the stories and the sort of the cultural reverences and the different sort of folklore or the folk stories or the different sort of customary rituals that we are still carrying forward and still happens in my family. I might not practice it for every day, but we have been grown up into it. So it also depends upon the transmission of the knowledge that one takes on and passes on from one generation to another. So yes, I agree that it is actually fading with time. But I think going back to what Anindya said, so sort of it would be great to also trace this probably a couple of years back, how sort of these things sort of changes. So yeah, a constant way of working in Sundarbans. So yeah, I don't know if I've answered you correctly, but this is what I found.
So I think we have time for one last question, and then we can wrap up. Yeah, please go ahead, Shambhavi.
Sorry, I was not able to raise my hand somehow. So, thank you so much for your input and for sharing with us your work. But so I am working with my team. I'm from GIZ, Shamavi, and we are working on cultural documentation in Sundarbans. And we are also talking to these different community groups. And I also noticed that there is slight difference in the way different communities are perceiving. So it's not a very homogenized view of how communities perceive coexisting with tigers. It's also very community specific. But is there some insight from your own sort of visits and travel that because it's not just reverse migration during like the COVID, but it's also how demographically people groups are changing in the area, right? So is there something that you came across like this during your, like not just a homogenized perception of existing, but are there certain more groups which tend to hold on to the is that something that's happening, and what's
Yeah, I mean, I would actually ask you back, what do you mean by groups, basically? And I keep on, I mean, just trying to answer your question here. And as I kept on mentioning that I've worked on just 2 villages, and this is just subjective to the findings of what I had done during that time. It might be very different in different other forage fringe villages across Sundarbans. As per groups, obviously, Sundarban is with the socially disadvantaged groups of scheduled caste and scheduled tribes, which is Adivasis and the other backward caste. So across this different group, if you're talking about these sort of groups, obviously there is no homogenization. As obviously I did not delve into it, but for example, in the case of wild boar, where Adivasis would be consuming them and would be offering them, there were stories of offering them to their folk goddess Tushu. However, with recent times, there are signs of, probing into much more offering of vegetarian fruits and all, and not meat. But again, this is certain families. Yeah, it's certain families. It's not that every Adivasi family is doing that. Some of them are holding on to it. And I keep on telling that, and I've given, Sundarban is so subjective in nature. And it is so differentiating that what it is practiced in one village might not be the same practicing. But and again, the evidence sort of changes, because a lot of people have said that, across different communities, including the Muslim minorities, are revering Bon Bibi. But yes, but in my in my work, we have found that every individual, whether it's devoid of religious thing, when they're going inside the forest, they're just not revering Bon Bibi, but they would also participate in this kind of Monusha Jatras, and they would come. And we have Muslim people who are performing in the Monusha Jatra, who are engaging with this. So there are these little nuances of cultural engagement that we find, but as you said, they are very subjective in nature, and it will keep on changing.
Yeah. No, just to add on to that, I was also wondering, not in the context of to see exactly which one is more connected to nature per se, because every group has a different relationship to different parts of nature, but more to see if this perception of conservation is also linked to the way the community is livelihoods are linked to the forest, right? So I'm sure there must be some gradation, and I wonder if that's something to explore beyond this work of yours also, like not just for you. I'm just thinking aloud.
No,
that how do we try to see that how the conservation landscape is also defined by the different groups that stay out there, because their livelihoods are what sort of determining their interest also.
Yes,
and
that's true. I completely agree with you. because and I put it out in my PhD most of the time, is that because Sundarbans and because of its cultural folklore, so Bone Bibi has become a global
That's
icon suddenly, and everybody's talking about Bone Bibi. But then there is, I mean, before Bone Bibi, there was Punosha Mongol Kabbo, there is Ganga Devi, and then there is Tushu, there is Makal Thakur, which is like the goddess of the fishes and god of the fishes, and then there are so many these little things, but then they are also sort of evading with time because people are moving across places, people are not keeping them. So yeah, it would be interesting to sort of link them.
We also found information about some deities which are just now left in one village with one family, and it was very it's still an ongoing learning process. So yeah, great to hear from it's from
Love to
different
connect with you
perspectives.
later on, Shambhav. We'd love to learn from you. So
Thank you.
thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, Rana.
Yeah, just a quick comment in continuation with what Shambhavi and Camellia was saying. There was a study in NIAS, the organization that I am in, which showed the influence actually of urbanization on villages in the Sundarbans, which are fairly close to Kolkata, and the commercialization, because there are people coming in, was marked very interestingly by the replacement of Bone Bibi and various pujos, which were dedicated to Bone Baby by the goddess Durga. So there were several communities and families which were then speaking more about Durga than about Bone Bibi. And this was sort of infiltrating in, and clearly the festivals became more sort of exercises in business, in trade, rather than of the culture that you could see. And so there's a PhD thesis on this, and if both of you are interested, I'll try and get hold of a copy and send it to you.
That would be lovely. I mean,
Thank you.
just to add to that, because I just remembered, because when I was talking about goddess Tushu, but Tushu is, it's something, it's like an iconic, you do not give any body to it. And currently, a lot of, as you said, the villages which are a little bit closer to Kolkata and all, now the Tushu has the figure of Lakshmi. And then Lakshmi is much more a Brahminical deity. And I sort of have a paper talking about this, how we're sort of de-Brahmanizing versus Sanskritizing and then re-Brahmanizing it towards that. So yeah, it would be fascinating, Ananda, if you could share.
Yes,
Thank you.
I will. I definitely will. Yeah, thanks.
So yeah, I think that's it for us. And thank you so much once again, Camellia, for giving us this really, really fascinating talk and the amazing conversations that followed. And yeah, thank you all, the audience, for being here and being such a great, engaging audience as well. And yeah, and that's it. And have a good evening, everyone.
Take care. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you.